tried a new experiment, which was sponsorship. And so we would like to thank two of our sponsors tonight, American Friends Service Committee and Everence.
And now some announcements. Philadelphia Yearly Meeting Annual Sessions is following the gathering this year, and business meeting and general check-in on Saturday following lunch will be in Roberts Hall in the Jaharis recital space. And Philadelphia Yearly Meeting friends, remember, when in doubt, read your field guide. There's a lot going on. And so we ask you to join us in taking a minute in worship to hold in worshipful healing the many people around the world who are victims of violence in all its forms: gun violence, domestic violence, the violence of poverty, and war.
As your clerks for the week, both Lori and I have felt messages arising in us. At the opening evening program, you might remember that we offered two queries for the week. They were, how will I minimize harm in our 2024 gathering community? And what does Rooted in Story mean to you?
Unfortunately, we've witnessed harm at this gathering, our gathering. Harm has occurred in our community, and it's not someone else's problem. It's our problem. Collectively, we talk about beloved community, but are we doing beloved community? Beloved community is loving each other enough to check our own assumptions and behaviors. Beloved community is loving each other enough to receive critical feedback and push back against our own defensive responses. Beloved community is noticing harmful behavior when it's happening, when others are acting in harmful ways, and when we ourselves are acting in harmful ways, and responding by loving us so much that we interrupt that behavior. And it all starts with what Quakers do so well: a pause. The pause is an interruption. It's the space between harm and repair where things can go differently. Pause and change your behavior. Take a break. Pause and say it. Let's pause because I'm noticing something hurtful is happening here. We can do this differently. We can be accountable to each other as individuals and to the whole as beloved community. Beloved community doesn't just happen. We have to make it happen.
For many people, the gathering feels magical. Does it feel that way to you? It's like there is some Quaker magic at work. But it isn't magic that makes this wonderful week happen. It's actually the invisible work of FGC staff and of many, many volunteers. As we said earlier in the week, 95% of the gathering relies on the work of about 5% of the gathering. And the majority of those volunteers are women. So as a man, I feel that this invisibility of work needs to be named. There's no shame or blame in my message. It is simply a noticing that I want to bring forward to the body the invisibility of the work of the many behind this gathering.
Tonight's Q&A will be handled in the same way as last night. I have a question. Were you offered a note card and a pencil when you came in? Great. Okay. As questions come to you during Tom's talk tonight, please write them on a card. Only one question per card, please. And after he finishes his talk and we return to the silence, please hand your cards towards the center aisle. The ushers will come from the back of the room towards the front, collecting the cards. And I just saw a basket raise up nice and high so you can see where they're going to head. The questions that are selected will be asked. There will most likely not time to respond to every question, and that's okay. That's an opportunity for you to carry your question to another space at breakfast or lunch tomorrow with friends as you gather across campus. And now it is our pleasure to introduce to you Ben and Thistle, co-clerks of the 2025 Friends General Conference virtual gathering, and their two children, one of whom will introduce themselves using the microphone.
Welcome, friends. It's so good to see you all. My name is Ben Hoffendahl.
And I'm Thistle Hoffendahl. I'm a member of Redwood Forest Meeting in Pacific Yearly Meeting. So we're here all the way from California and glad to be with you. And and want to say your name? Okay.
And I have it.
Yeah. Yeah, with us we have our daughter Emmy Lou and our son Robin.
And here's Robin. And also just make sure to notice our, we'll have some cards with our email for anyone who wants to reach out on the table over there on your way out.
Yeah, we have some cards by the door, but we wanted to share with you the theme for next year's gathering, which is a spring whose waters never fail. And this theme comes to us from the book of Isaiah, from a longer passage that we just fell in love with, that talks about how when we feed the hungry, when we clothe the naked, when we break every yoke of oppression, then our faith will become like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail.
And I love my husband.
Oh, and Emily wanted to say her name again. Thank you.
This gathering, upcoming gathering will be different than the one we're in a few ways. It will be held, thank you. It will be held online and it will be held this upcoming February. We really want to be.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So that was a decision made by FGC Gathering, I think, in part because there'll be a young adult and youth event in the summer, and also in part because if people aren't going to be traveling, February is a time when a lot of people are at home, not traveling anyway. It'll give people more flexibility in the summer. But also one thing we're really excited about is creating something that feels unique and that feels like a new opportunity. So instead of it being a replacement or something that feels like a stand-in or something that's less than an in-person gathering, we're really excited about getting creative around how to make this welcoming, how to make it accessible to friends who, for physical mobility reasons, scheduling reasons, financial reasons, aren't able to be here with us at this in-person gathering. And so we're hoping that this will be a joyful and welcoming way of bringing the spiritual vitality of this gathering to people in their home communities.
Thank you all so much for letting us take this time to introduce ourselves to you. We're so excited to see you all.
So thank you, Ben and Thistle, for answering the call. And now please welcome Euclid Bautista, member of Multnomah Friends Meeting, who will introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, friends. As they said, my name is Euclid Bautista. I am from Portland, Oregon, which is the unceded lands of Chinookan people, Multnomah tribes, Clackamas tribes, Multnomah tribe. Hello? No. Testing. Testing. Test.
I'm so sorry.
Apologies. Apologies for that, friends. Again, I am from Multnomah Friends Meeting in Portland, Oregon, unceded lands of Chinookan people, specifically Multnomah, Clackamas, and Kayapuya tribes. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker and I have known each other just a few years. It is a few years ago that I discovered a group of friends who were working on decolonizing Quakers, and Tom Kunesh was part of that group. Shortly after that, I realized that Tom has such wonderful talent and messages and energy to bring. It's gone off again. We're having, okay. Bear with us, our mics seem to be going in and out. I recognize that he had a message and a fortitude that we need within FGC, and asked him to join the Institutional Assessment Implementation Committee. Presently, he is one of the clerks at that committee, and we have work that we are doing to bring the recommendations of the institutional assessment into the light and in across our affiliated yearly meetings. I'd like to introduce now Tom Kunesh. Now does it?
Testing, testing. All right. Buenas tardes. Good evening. Gracias. And thank you, Walter, Lori, and John, for inviting me to this gathering. It is an honor for me to be here with you, with all of you tonight, and I want to honor all my relations, including the Oaks and the Willows and the Lenni Lenape people here today and in past generations, and especially the red-winged blackbirds whose calls have made me feel most at home. All my relatives. Y vosotros, amigos, también os llamo parientes. And you, friends, too, I call you relatives tonight. A series of cautions to you, my relatives, tonight. Hablaré en inglés. I'll speak English, my first language, to you, but with place names and word meanings you may not be familiar with, because I want to center the Lakota narrative, and you want and expect a narrative that centers the European experience. Understand that you would more happily and more completely receive my narrative if I used your lexicon, but you wouldn't learn what happens when the English narrative goes off the rails and centers something indigenous in English. I'm happy to explain myself more, but later. I say some things in Spanish because A, I don't know how to say them in Lakota, and B, because I love Spanish, and C, I want to recognize, honor, and play with indigenous relatives who got taken over by the other great European oppressor. D, we are too monolingual and too English already. And E, friends need the genetic and tonal diversity of other languages, other processing metaphor systems, other stories. Pues, bienvenidos a todos. One other thing, while me and my siblings' mother is enrolled Standing Rock Lakota Oyate and call ourselves white and mixed blood Lakota, we were raised Catholic as her mom, her dad, her grandma, and I still consider myself Catholic from the land of the 2016 gathering near Lake Wobegon, Minnesota. So please consider the source when you hear me talk about Christianity. And know that I have been practicing a very different tradition for the past 26 years and 1,400 miles physically distant with people I consider my blood relatives, but that my remote practice in Tennessee is inherently different, and that I do not represent Lakota people or Lakota religion, especially as a friend. This is an auspicious day, the 4th of July, to give this kind of talk. I asked Walter if he really wanted me to say anything on this day. 248 years ago, after the declaration of English settlers decolonizing themselves from England in 1776, but 148 years ago this week, that new USA, 100 years old, continued its shocked reaction to the defeat of the US Army 7th Cavalry by Lakota and Cheyenne forces out in the greasy grass in Lakota and Cheyenne lands that the United States of America claimed as its own. That's my celebration. The news arrived in Philadelphia and Washington yesterday and today in 1876, perfectly in time to screw up the USA centennial of the defeat of the US Army at the Battle of the Little Bighorn by the Border Patrol of the Allies, the Lakota and Cheyenne nations. This also marks 484 years after Hernando de Soto started the both accidental, biological, and then intentional military noventimation. word you might want to write down, noventimation, of the indigenous population of this continent of Turtle Island in 1540. Old dates, places, and peoples that mean very little to us now in Philadelphia, but are remembered by people whose ancestors lived here and in Tennessee and in Minnesota and points west. These are little bits of stories with roots deep in historical narratives that only indigenous people talk about this way. From this political perspective, from this constantly recreated historical memory, long gone from the original tellers, long removed from the places where they happened, existing today in books and websites and stories, families tell each other about who was where when. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a story that I never ever heard in my life till I read about it in an old magazine that I found online when I was in my 40s, about the Dakota uprising in Minnesota in 1862, and how it intersected my great-great-grandparents out on the Missouri River in what the USA called Dakota territory, but was actually in the national boundaries of the Lakota Oyate. I'm going to tell you about the two different kinds of silence that the Religious Society of Friends practice, technological and political, in the past, present, and future, and the immoral responsibility Quakerism practices when it is silent in the face of oppression and war. I'm going to tell you the stories about Quaker collusion with empire, collaborative Quaker work with empire against indigenous people that required then and requires today Quaker silence. Then I'm going to tell you how our collective historical story about ourselves over the past 400 years, stories of our religious origins, illustrated and punctuated with our inherited English cultural text, inherently recreates sexist, classist, and racist narratives in us ourselves. And how we need to pull up old roots of non-indigenous culture in order to stop the spread of infection and find new roots, new tubers to plant to grow a more diverse and inclusive set of stories for our friend, children, and our future. Ampetu Washte. My name is Tom Kunesh. I was born in Minnesota. Lived in many different places, like aboard ship in the Persian Gulf and Red Sea, Spain and Berkeley, and currently live next to Nashville, where I go to meeting. I'm here today to affirm voices of people of colors who have had silence actively practiced on us by so-called friends of white truth and white light. I'm here tonight to help show how the quest for truth in darkness and in quiet, using the technology of silence, is a better, less traveled way. First, let's get some word issues out of the way. As a linguist, I love hearing where words come from and how they're used in different ways by different peoples to mean different things. But I won't practice that on this evening, except to say that moral imperatives here, we should be clearer and more respectful in our language towards indigenous peoples. Indians are from India. We should respect those South Asians from India as indigenous people in their own right, with their own identity, and stop the cultural identity theft that Europeans started 400 years ago and haven't gotten over yet today. Indians are from India. Lakota, Lenni Lenape, Anishinaabe, Dene, all of us indigenous peoples from Turtle Island have our own nation's names, just as Europeans have their own national names. Call us by the good names of our nations and call this land we come from Turtle Island, because it is alive and we were here with it before Europeans gave it the European Amerigo Vespucci's name for their colonial extractive business enterprise called America. Turtle Island predates America. Applying the term Native American to indigenous peoples is not only wrongful anachronism, but also centers natives as an adjectival accessory to European America. It centers America. Please learn what the term America means as applied to Turtle Island, that they are two different things, and is a colonial settler forced embrace of indigenous people. No, thank you. Let's get the objective history lesson of tonight's talk out of the way now. Last year's rising up of indigenous Palestinian people in Gaza against the colonizing settlers of Europe's Jewish and American diaspora struck me as a repetition of indigenous Dakota people uprising in Minnesota in 1862 around this time of year against the colonizing settlers of Europe's diaspora for many of the same reasons. Hunger caused by broken treaties that traded land for food, hunting land loss, more hunger, white control and oppression, the desire for freedom to return to open spaces and open hunting. When the Asante Dakota felt they couldn't take it any longer, they rebelled the way they knew would cause a reaction to their situation. They took white people's food and killed settlers. It ended in Minnesota 5 weeks later. At the end of it all, by the following year, 471 whites were killed and 150 Dakota were killed, plus 40 more were hung by the neck in the largest mass execution in USA history, death warrants signed by Abraham Lincoln. That is how I remember December 26th and December 25th and December 30th and all of December, the killing time. Within 2 months of that execution, the Dakota were expelled from their homeland, their named homeland, Minnesota, and the US Congress abrogated and annulled all treaties with the Dakota people, confiscating all lands held by the Dakota and all annual payments due to them forfeited for feeding and standing up for themselves against an ever more encroaching empire. The Dakota were relocated to new reservations out of state and their old land sold to farming European settlers. I have not been able to find a single yearly meeting minute or report on the oppressions that led to these events of the Dakota, nor on the measure of the responses by the US government in any Friends yearly meetings. During the Intifada in August 1862, one band of Sisseton, Dakota attacked some settlers separately down by Lake Shetek, killed 15 whites, took 3 women and 8 children hostage. The Sisseton band that kidnapped them fled north and west away from Minnesota and even farther away when the Intifada was put down by the US Army and Minnesota volunteers and into what is now South Dakota. They stayed on the run, Dakota warriors with white hostages for 4 months, turning down offers to trade supplies for the hostages. In the end, it was a fraternity of two kettles Lakota who called themselves Strong Hearts from the Cheyenne River Reservation, just south of Standing Rock, who had way earlier committed themselves to brave acts of kindness and charity rather than battle, and set themselves in November 1862 the purpose of rescuing the hostages and were able to successfully offer a fight or a trade of horses and supplies for the white women and children. The Stronghearts went to the fur trader and his wife for supplies to trade. The Sisseton traded. The Stronghearts gave up their horses and supplies in exchange for these white captives and started south to Fort Pierre for freedom. They met back up with the white fur trader and his Lakota wife at the fort, my great-great-grandma and her husband, who the records say fed and sheltered and clothed the women and children for 2 days before delivering them to the U.S. Army post for return to Minnesota. The stories of the Dakota, Lakota, and white groups that intersected in this longest story of the Dakota Intifada of 1862 did not end well. Not for the rescuers, who were seen as white collaborators and bad natives, or the hostage takers who were killed, or the hostages. It did kind of end well for me, though. My great-grandma was born 9 months later and 329 miles downriver. When she was 15, her family removed to the Standing Rock Reservation. Friends meetings had been established on the east coast of Turtle Island for 200 years by this time, with meetings extending westward into Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana, and I still have not been able to find a single yearly meeting minute or report on USA government depredations and civilian oppressions of indigenous people that led to these events, nor on the measure of US government responses. Silence. I could be wrong. I haven't seen all the records. I wish somebody could show me that somebody out east here noticed and mentioned and minuted a reaction to the Dakota Intifada in 1862 or 1863, the way that we talk about the Intifada of 2023. But all I have read, what little I can find of those yearly meetings minutes online and available to the public, is nothing, is silence. We are good at silence. It is the reason I go to meetings on Sundays, the opportunity to sit with other people and appreciate the dark of my closed eyes while aiming for a quieter mind, potentially linking my head's Bluetooth emissions with other people. You other people, my relatives. This is a religious technology of silence I enjoy, practiced by Catholics and Buddhists and yogis everywhere. But it is the politics of this other kind of Quaker silence that bothers me, that makes me ask, why are Quakers vocal when their empire is threatened and silent in the face of their empire's chosen enemies? I am rooted in story. The story of the Intifada of the Minnesota Dakota in 1862, of its intersection with my family in 1862 and 1863, grounds me. I have been to the place of the trading post on the west side of the Missouri. I have been to the spit of land in southeast South Dakota where my great-grandma was born. I have been to St. Peter's Cemetery at Fort Yates on Standing Rock and smoked and offered tobacco on her grave. That story roots me in those grounds. We say we are rooted in story, but it is two very narrow, very specific stories the Religious Society of Friends are rooted in. One, the Bible. Two, 17th century England and its colonies on Turtle Island. I have been hoping that there would be room among friends for positive Lakota stories of the 19th century too, like that of the Stronghearts, later called fool soldiers. The way Catholicism has incorporated Kateri Tekakwitha and Episcopalians proud of Vine Deloria Sr. I was hoping to find a tale of the Dakota Intifada or the killing of Sitting Bull in 1890 and the subsequent massacre of 300 Lakota killed by the US Army 7th Cavalry, or of the Ganadahutan massacre of 96 Christian pacifist Lenape and Mohican people in 1782. It hurts to say that our relatives did not earn a mention in the minutes of Friends' yearly meetings. This was and is the practice of Quaker silence on behalf of fellow white colonists, white settlers, white Americans. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, in the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Why no tales? Why no minutes, no testimonies, no epistles? Because, as we were informed by a 28-year-old Quaker woman 6 years ago, Quakers are colonizers. And as colonizers, our allegiance then and now is to the empire that sponsored our colonies, our settlers. Colonizers cannot apologize for their own behavior that we see as good, as God ordained, as justified, as beneficial to themselves and to us. Friends, their self-interest, our self-interest, is locked in step with empire, with the empire's peace, Pax Britannica and Pax Americana. Imperial peaces created by the military might of British and Army and American navies and armies around the world. When there is no written testimony of peace with indigenous peoples in America, or a lament for the buffalo killed by American policy to starve out the Lakota people, when there is no written record of the wrongs done by American empire leading up to the leadership role Friends played in the Quaker assimilation and re-education camps of the 19th century America, no theoretical correctives offered up by idealistic American Friends in response to the death and destruction perpetrated on indigenous people by American empire, we are left with the sounds of Quaker silence. In relation to indigenous peoples, then, American Quaker peace testimony is non-existent. It is a lie of untold stories. It is a practiced silence of siding with empire for self-gain and self-preservation. It is a sin of omission. And we Quakers have no common practice of examining ourselves for corporate sin and its correction. The land is gone. The buffalo have been tokenized. The language of the National Congress of American Indians is the English taught at Carlisle concentration camp. The religion on the reservations and of 90% of tribal chiefs or more, 90% of tribal chiefs is the same religion practiced in the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., telling the same 2,000-year-old story of a land 6,000 miles away. Land, language, religion, it's all gone, except for the 5.4% of indigenous people who still speak their native language, the 2.3% of land still held by tribes, and 1.7% of indigenous people in the USA who still practice their natural native religion. With all this depressing history of Quaker silence in the face of indigenous destruction, it is so good to hear acknowledgments of the indigenous people who used to live here and there and live here today. Land acknowledgments are a good start. And I recommend that every meeting that wants to be considered friend to indigenous people should know and be public about the original owners of Meeting House and College lands. But you should understand that land acknowledgments of indigenous people are performances that come with a price. Land back. That's kind of the trick of acknowledging that you most likely got your land through a corrupt land deal with empire, British or American. Once you commit to acknowledging who was here before you, you should be committed to finding out the legality and the morality of how the land was acquired, and then how your family's land was acquired. These are stories of family roots that need to be told to be fair to the long history of deep Quaker silence on the persecution of indigenous peoples, that need to be told by your meeting, by you, by your family. Now that I've hopefully got you thinking about land and tribe acknowledgement, I want to push it further into 3 more historical correctives for the Quaker sin of silence: land back, language back, religion back. Land back is just what it sounds like: returning land back to the people it was stolen from. There are many plans out there, from contributing to the tribal purchase of land from a Quaker-named nonprofit out in California, to paying annual rent to a tribe up in Seattle, to promising to give 1% of your next property sale to a local tribe, a 640-acre plan to give 320 acres to natives and 320 acres to African Americans together. Land back can be personal, but I think it's better if it's done communally, in a meeting, with other meetings, and in relationship with a tribe. Language is the operating system in which we think and we hear. Language encodes our cultural values and social institutions. American English was USA government mandated on all tribal governments and in all tribal schools, including Quaker schools on reservations, in order to force assimilation into the American melting pot by speaking the colonizer's tongue and reading the settler's Bible. Language Back is a tribe's own program to reclaim its own language by teaching it in their own schools and reintegrating it back into the community by using it in tribal meetings, signs, communications. Many, many tribes have Language Back kinds of programs that could use your financial support. The 4th historical corrective needed, that is a natural successor to Land Back and Language Back, that could also use your support, but is inherently more problematic for Friends, is Religion Back. Supporting tribes' return to their original religions, which means extinguishing Christian missionary efforts to reservations, deconstructing the churches and church networks that have fed off of forced conversions and melting pot assimilations for the past 300 years, my family included, returning church land, removing church participation on native lands. The reason Religion Back is a problem for Quakers is that Friends have never associated the evils committed by British and American empires on indigenous peoples with their foundational religion, that God blessed the taking of land for his chosen people and killing all the indigenous peoples that got in the way of the new colonists settlers God wanted living there. Robert Warrior, an indigenous Osage theologian, described it pretty plainly in his essay, Canaanites, Cowboys, and Indians, published in Christianity and Crisis in 1989. Warrior lays out the covenant of Yahweh, God, with his chosen people, detailing God's plans to deliver the land of the indigenous Canaanites to the Jews by military conquest, land theft, and God-blessed genocide of the indigenous population in order to fulfill their destiny that he prescribed. It's there in Genesis, Exodus, and Deuteronomy. This is both the easiest and hardest part to write, to read, to speak out loud, to say to you. The source of the racism, sexism, and classism that Quakerism suffers from is in our roots. It is our story. The tale inherited by generations upon generations of us in Christendom, the Bible, from in the beginning to I am the way, the truth, and the life, that all sides of my family, Bohemian, French Canadian, Lakota, had to learn and practice in order to participate as members in American empire. It is the easiest thing to say because the connections between quoted statements from the Bible and historical realities in Christian societies are so easily drawn and so obvious as historical algorithms, as correlated relationships, as logical conclusions. It is the hardest thing to say because telling the truth on institutions 248 and 400 and 2024 years old will cause emotional pain, suffering, arguments, and divisiveness that will cause heartache for both many of you who have invested so much, so heavily, so all in this single story. And heartache for me as the observer, bearing witness to the damage done by whom? Inspired by what? Osage theologian Warrior laid out the connection between chosen people in the Bible story and the destruction of the Lenape, the Shawnee, the Cherokee, the Dakota, the Anishinaabe peoples 35 years ago. The story connection was printed in public for all to see, to read, to discuss, to integrate, but maybe because it was not addressed specifically to Christian churches, to denominations, to friends meetings, to indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, it did not take root as a story itself, as a correction. I repeat it now and ask that you read it and ask yourselves, how do we live with a story of a supposedly good God, our God, that orders and blesses the taking of land from indigenous people and the killing of them in order to fulfill our side of the contract as his chosen people for us to get the land to live and farm on? How do we justify teaching our kids any religious stories of racism, sexism, and classism, along with condoning genocide and land theft in the Bible? By claiming that we are a Bible people, by citing book, chapter, and verses at our meetings and gatherings, we continue not only to validate among ourselves the truth and power of racist, sexist, and classist scripture for ourselves, but continue to teach our children and adult visitors that we are aligned with the same metaphysical power that blesses this secular empire, America, that it is this racist, sexist, and classist God in which we trust. I shudder in this thought that we are rooted in this anti-indigenous story. Still, there is hope. I noticed a couple of workshops here at this conference that offer a critique of where we are today as friends and how we can get better. I noticed that FGC has a new leadership position for organizational cultural transformation. I read and reread Vanessa July's published talk from 3 years ago, Radical Transformation, long overdue for the Religious Society of Friends, and I take it to heart. I take that title to heart. You should take that title to heart. Her organic metaphor of Quakerism being like a tobacco hornworm caterpillar inspires me. What an organic thought. Inspires me to think of the story of one creature that transforms into another, almost completely different. How organically different they look and are, yet simply phases of one organism. The key to my understanding of the story is how the caterpillar dissolves itself inside its cocoon, not of its own choice, but automatically, into a genetic soup, then is guided through the transmogrifying process by imaginal discs that rearrange itself as caterpillar soup into a flying moth. To continue using July's metaphor, if we can imagine ourselves as a caterpillar of Quakerism, if we were to continue our life cycle as that being, becoming an enzyme soup of friendly religious societies, what caterpillar forms of Quakerism need to be cast off? And if we as individuals and as meetings are resting together in that enzyme soup of us as dissolved caterpillar, what are Quakerism's imaginal discs? What DNA is it that will grow us out of our cocoon and into the next phase? I believe that Quakerism's imaginal discs are 3. Friends, communal practice of quiet sitting, and friends' antipathy, dislike towards creeds and outward forms, and friends' universalism that can not only see that of good in every person, that of good in every person, but that of good in everything, and in every language, and in every animal, and in every religion as well. Sitting quietly together in this 400th year since George Fox's birth in Imperial Britain, let us remember that within the colonizing religion also exists a decolonizing movement. It is time for a nominally Christian American denomination to publicly reject its past, present, and future alliance with empire. It is time to publicly deconstruct our addiction to imperial religion's single-story monoculture down to 0 and give up the security empire offers us. It is time to decolonize our religious literature to become both independent of scripture and of British and American imperial narratives. It is time to acknowledge the universal good in everyone and in all religions and to show it. It is time to indigenize and diversify our religious literature, and it is time to decolonize our language use and to center the other. That friendship aligned with empire has actively ignored with silence and passively obliterated through its alliances with empire. We are that colonizing religion. We can and should be that decolonizing movement. This is my testimony. Thank you for your time, for listening in tongues. I'm going to sit, rest my legs a bit, and be quiet for a few minutes. I invite you into the closed eyes dark, too. But also to stand up, stretch, or walk away as you like. You can also take this time to write down a question or comment you may have and pass it down to our helpers. In a few minutes, I'll answer 5 or 6 questions. Thank you.
One, two.
The shell game. Why, why Turtle Island? Keawita and Lakota, it's what some people use. All nations have different names and very few, I don't know of any nation that has a name for the whole continent. It is a name, it's a 20th century invention, just like America is an invention in the 15th century. Turtle Island is an invention to say that we were here before the Americas, before Amerigo Vespucci, and we don't appreciate having to have his name put on us. Your talk focused on aspects of the Old Testament. Isn't the New Testament anti-imperial, anti-empire, and don't we draw inspiration from that? America in the founding, in the doctrines of discovery, took its knowledge, its basis from the Old Testament. The United States took its directives straight from being a chosen people. Manifest destiny comes straight from the Old Testament. And yes, I can understand how some people will say that the New Testament replaces the Old Testament, but that's not how the founding fathers saw it. And that's not what was used on indigenous peoples here. So you can, well, I should say that I don't find Jesus particularly anti-empire at all. To me, Jesus was a collaborator. He said, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God's what is God's. He did essentially the same thing that George Fox did when Cromwell offered him a position in the army, and Fox said, no, I won't fight you. I won't do anything bad against you, but I'm not going to fight for you either. Jesus did essentially the same thing, and that is essentially acknowledging the empire. And this is a kind of a sore subject, a touchy subject, because I just don't want to, I have family that don't agree with me, and I want to respect, and I don't want to say things. So I appreciate that. And I did want to say that we could cut the New Testament up into pieces like the Unitarians did. Do you know about that? The Jefferson Bible. Jefferson took a razor blade and cut out all the miracles, all the metaphysics that he didn't think were real. And it's called the Jefferson Bible. I think it was published once. Maybe there are 3 copies left in the 1820s. So you can cut and paste, but I don't think he was anti-empire. I think he wanted to survive. How do I take this back to my meeting? Background info, story, next steps. How do you recommend individual meetings moving forward? I would go look and see if everything I say is true. Number one is get a copy, watch this, whatever. Go get Robert Allen Warrior's text, Canaanites, Cowboys, and Indians, and see what you think about Exodus and Genesis and Deuteronomy, was it? Okay. And see if those things make sense to you, and read how it's applied in America and if it makes sense. Then I would have your meeting read that essay also, and then talk about those 4 things: land acknowledgement, land back, language back, and religion back, and see if and how you can do them, and if you can do them in order. They're hard. I was not told I would have to make this easy. I was told, I thought You know, when I think of Mary Dyer and I think of other people who gave their lives, you know, to being beaten and killed and stuff, you know, this is a piece of cake walk. So read the essay by Warrior and read the people's history of Turtle Island. How do I take this back to my meeting? I don't know. I imagine this is recorded and that you can get a tape of it sometime and you can play it at your meeting and say, isn't this guy effing nuts? Too much. Yes. Isn't it contradictory to say accept all religions but get rid of Christianity? Oh. I love this. I love this. It's kind of, it reminds me of Black Lives Matter. No, really, all lives matter. It's kind of the inverse. Christianity has now so much power, so much control, so much authority. It is the only story that many of us ever grew up with, the only religious story that we ever grew up with, that we can and we should be able to survive 400 more years without it. If Christianity is true, it will survive regardless. It survived Thomas Jefferson's Bible, scissoring it up. I'm not saying that you need to get rid of Christianity as a religion. I'm saying that we are addicted to Christianity and that addiction to anything is not a good thing. And that if we want to correct ourselves, we are going to have to get over this addiction. We are going to have to deconstruct ourselves down. What I like to, you know that Joan Armatrading song, Down to Zero? All right. That we have to get down to zero with Christianity. And we can invite other denominations to do the same. And say, let's get down, let's deconstruct, let's get out of it and see what good we can find in other religions. You aren't going to find good in other religions while still holding on to the alcohol of Christianity. The only way you're going to find out about white buffalo calf woman is if you get rid of Christianity. So I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm saying, can you as a person survive 20 years, the next 20 years without Christianity and spend that time reading other cultures? What good is it to say that the Lenni Lenape lived here if you can't say hello in Lenni Lenape or in Lenape? What good is it if you don't know their story? What good is it if you don't know what the name of the red-winged blackbird is out here that sings so nice? If you don't know the name in Lenape, if you don't know their creation myth, why acknowledge Lenape people if you don't know if you don't want to honor them with their stories? If you have Christianity to hang on to, that's what you're going to hang on to. You'll still be drinking. Whether it's a shot or whether you change it to wine or beer or 3.2 or whatever, you're still drinking the Kool-Aid. How did you go about reckoning with Quakers' complicity in ongoing indigenous genocide while continuing to practice the faith? I want to separate the technology of silence. That's what I call it, technology of quiet, whatever it is. There is the practice that you find in Buddhism. How is Quakerism different from Buddhism? Organically, visually, You see a Quaker sitting there and you see a Buddhist sitting there, and they may sit for the same amount of time. How do you tell the difference between what they are doing? How do you tell the difference between a yogi meditating and a Quaker? How do you tell the difference between a Catholic nun sitting there in silence with no rosary beads, just in silence, and a Quaker sitting next to that person? Are they really doing two different things? Yesterday in a group, we were talking about what we do when we sit in silence. And so many of us said, well, the first 10 minutes is monkey brain. We share the same stuff. So practicing the faith, I don't have faith, number one. I don't have faith in just about anything. You guys might notice my first name. You might know the formal way of saying Tom, which is Thomas. And you might figure out that there's another name, another adjective that goes with that. Anybody? Doubting Thomas. I knew that from age 6, that I was, they always called me Doubting Thomas, or, you know, it was either that or the apostle. No, and that was the apostle, and then, of course, Aquinas. But, so I don't practice a faith. I practice a technology with a group of people that I like, that I identify with, that I think have good principles that come from much of the same background as I do. And that's not a problem. Quakers' complicity in indigenous genocide, that I'm learning. I didn't know about it. I imagine you didn't learn about it. It's a revelation to us all. Paula Palmer gave me a book called With Good Intentions. And it's about Quakers schools with the Odo and the Pawnee out west. And I understand the good intentions, and remember that my family is largely white, and I know where they came from, and I know the settlement, I know the farms we had. I know the peoples that those farms were taken from. So it is interesting being mixed blood. It is hard being mixed blood, but I don't think I've completely reckoned with it. You know, I think a lot of us have practical schizophrenias in us, that we have two minds on things, and that they are oftentimes in conflict, but we as human organic beings juggle them, and oftentimes pretty well. So someday the reckoning, when I get into talking about this, it gets worse, so I'll stop. Can you please reference the Toward Right Relationships webinar? What is that? I know, I was looking for my, yes, I was, my script. There is a Towards Right Relationships webinar about boarding schools research. I hate that name, boarding schools, because they weren't boarding schools. I don't know where you guys grew up, but where I grew up in central Minnesota, there were two kinds of boarding schools. One was Catholic and was for boys going into the seminary, and the other one was for rich boys, rich girls. In Chattanooga, it's the same thing. In Nashville, it's the same thing. Boarding schools. That term, to me, says wealth, power, privilege, white. So to hear, number one, Indian boarding schools, number one, they weren't run by indigenous people. First of all, you have to say, you know, screw that Indian word. Get rid of it. Don't say it. Well, that's what the federal government calls it. was about to bomb you. You know, screw the federal government and that word, change it. Tell them to change it. And when indigenous people, when tribal leaders tell you, well, that's our word, you say, okay, and walk away. Or you can say, okay, and walk away. I do not fight with my family. I do not, my mom always used the word, my sisters use the word. So hopefully the changes are person by person. Each one of us will say to somebody else when they say, you know, Indian boarding schools, you can say, ouch. And they'll say, why did you say ouch? You say, because Indians that I know are from India. I know other kinds of people by other names, but so this, excuse me, they were prison camps. Who said that? Yeah, thank you. My great uncle Collie was sent to Carlisle in I think 1903, 1904, and I think last time 1910. He ran away 3 times. On the last time he ran away, he was hopping a freight in Ohio, a freight train. His leg slipped and he fell under and his left foot was cut off. So from then on, in prison and the reservation, he used to smuggle alcohol into the reservation. It is said, you know, it's a story, in his fake wooden foot. But it was a concentration camp. It was an assimilation camp. It was a re-education camp. We don't call Chinese re-education camps Uyghur boarding schools. Who would do that? Who would do such a thing? I'd like to extend that analogy further into African American history, but my mind's not working fast enough. This is a call for researchers on the Quaker assimilation camps. And it is a webinar in 2 weeks, in 11 days, online, and you can sign up for it with Friends Peace Teams. So I will put this somewhere. I'll put this up here next to you, Walter. And people can either see it, but I think it's also over there. Where is Kathy? Is Kathy out there? Oh, there's Kathy. See her? She says, go see the copy on the table. How can I, as a friend, do a better job of speaking up for Indigenous people? What is the first step? I don't think you should ever speak up for Indigenous people. I don't think Quakers' job is to speak up for Indigenous people. I think Quakers' job is to speak out against wrong, against injustice, about killing and murders. You know, we don't need to speak for Palestine or for Israel. You don't need to speak for Indigenous people, but what you need to say is notice that something is wrong. And notice that regardless of whether they say it or not, it is wrong. So when I say, you know, you should say, ouch, what's that other word that we're supposed to say? Whoa. Oops. Oops is when I make a mistake, and I haven't made one yet, have I? I will. I try to practice mistakes. But what was it? Whoa. Whoa. We should be saying whoa and catching each other. So speaking up for Indigenous people, number one, and another, it's a cheat on this question, but do that land acknowledgement. and then contact the tribe. All of the tribes in Tennessee were removed, all of them. And most of the land in Tennessee, and I can say definitely in Kentucky, was empty. There's a map called the First Contact Map of Native American languages, and there are vast spaces of white, meaning there were no tribes found there when first white people came through and recorded who was there or what the language was. I lost my train of thought. So land acknowledgements. So yes, you can still do land acknowledgements. You can still find a tribe or a connected tribe or the closest tribe and learn about them and invite them. You know, Quakers are said to have a lot of money. Did you know that? It is so easy, I think, to invite a speaker to come to your meeting. You don't have to speak for them. Let them come and speak for themselves. Hire them, pay them $1,000 to come have a nice time in Nashville and speak to you and to other congregations. Don't keep this to Quakers. That's another thing, is that we do these land acknowledgements by ourselves and we think, oh yeah, we're good and smart, and it is true. But it would be so much better if 4 congregations of different kinds of people got together and shared a land acknowledgement and co-sponsored a person coming to speak at all the places and to speak at places where where white people usually wouldn't go. When referring to USA, do I say North America? Do I not use America? You know, this is one of those that we are not going to get rid of Christianity tonight, or not that you should, but I guess I would recommend we do. But it is hard. It's difficult to change, to learn a new language, and to me, America means the enterprise, the USA enterprise, you know, that spaceship that travels through. It's the USA enterprise. It is the empire. It has, to many people, been the evil empire. And you can't get away from it. So I would call everything that we're doing here America. And that knowing that it is the United States of America and Canada is its own thing and Mexico is its own thing, and that separate the two. America is after 1500, and it's the European of Turtle Island, and Turtle Island is what this land is now and what Native people would like to see it be. So the USA, you can say the USA is on Turtle Island. You don't have to say North America. You don't have to say South America. There's a term, Abya Yala, that you can use for South America. But all of this is just new education, new words, new terms, new ways of thinking. And if it fits, it fits. If it works for you, just know where America came from, the word. 2 more. How's that? Is that good? How can Friends support reparations to tribal members independently of colonizing financial organizations? How can Friends support reparations to tribal members independently of colonizing financial organizations? We got funds. I know that my mom and dad received funds from Standing Rock for our water heater when it broke and for our twin beds. Anybody know what the root of Thomas is? Thomas. It's Didymus. You know about the Gospel of Thomas? Who Thomas was in that gospel? He was the twin brother of Jesus. Didymus means twin. I'm a twin. I was given, I don't know how my parents did it. I am the first twin. We have 4 twins in our family, and I am the first twin named Twin. And John and I were born together, and we got bunk beds paid for by Standing Rock. That came from the tribe to us. I would not support reparations to tribal members independently. I would support reparations to tribes or to programs like to a real college. I do want to say that there is a place called St. Joseph's School. I don't know if they've changed the name yet. I would not donate there. And the reason why, if you read the literature carefully, it may be a good school, and I do like the Catholic side. I do like parts of my Catholic side. I do like that I was born and raised Catholic, but it is sexist, racist, and classist to the extreme, and I have real problems with it. That said, there is a Catholic boarding school on Standing Rock that should not be there, and that is St. Joseph's, and I will get a lot of flack from Catholic Lakota people for saying that. But give to the college, give to Sitting Bull College, give to Red Cloud College, give to, I don't know what's at Cherokee, North Carolina. My ignorance is vaster. But do programs like the language program, the Yuchi language program of the Muskogee Creek Nation. The Muskogee have their own language program. So encourage those kind of cultural extensions. Last question. Please suggest how land acknowledgements can be linked with land back. Well, first you find out who was living here in 1700. All right, you can do, that's a historical thing. There are lots of maps that will online. A lot of them are pure crap. And, but try that language map that I suggested. First Contact Languages Map. It's put out by the University of Nebraska. There is a free abstracted version of it on Wikipedia under Native American Languages of North America or something like that. And find your place, see what it says, contact the localist, the closest tribe, and then write the land acknowledgement. Find a historian, find an anthropologist, an archaeologist, find somebody smart in tribal affairs, tribal history, excuse me, not tribal, tribal history, and write the land acknowledgement. Then comes the hard part. Then you need to start a relationship. When we did ours in Nashville, we wrote to the Muskogee Creek Nation and we asked if we could, we bought space in the Muskogee newspaper and printed our land acknowledgement in the Muskogee newspaper for them to see and attack or tear up or acknowledge or do whatever. I got one phone call. You know, it costs a couple $100. And I got one phone call from a woman in Nashville saying, I'm Muskogee. Why are you doing that? That was it. But you need a relationship. You need to start a relationship. And if they won't come to you, then you go to them. It's a 400-mile trip, I think, out to Oklahoma, and for us to go out there. And we haven't done that. It's easier to do in places like Minnesota or Oklahoma. I don't know how easy it is to do here locally, but you acknowledge, you find out who the tribe is, you acknowledge that they are the tribe that was here, and then you start a relationship. And as you know, relationships are not easy, but you have to try. And in the meantime, you can start putting up money, you can start collecting money, you can start deciding what to do, how much land to return, who to return it with, who to return it to, And you can be working on language back with that tribe. You could be learning that language. So that's it. I'm tuckered out. Thank you.